So Ken Burns is here, and it feels like yesterday we were talking about his country documentary, which I was just telling him offline has just followed me for the better part of 2 years now. As far as like I've been on a rampage on Spotify exploring every corner of the genre. A lot of it is thanks to Ken Burns. So thank you, Ken, and it's good to see you again. How are you?
I'm doing all right. I'm happy that 2 years out, it's still, generating searches and stuff like that. It's such an endlessly wonderful topic because it isn't just one thing. Everybody that doesn't know country music thinks it's a one thing, and it's a many thing.
It is a many thing. I mean, that is the best way to put it. And before we get into your newest doc, which we've been kind of getting through at light speed here because there's no other way to do it. I'm so glad that we have the opportunity to binge it. It's Ali. It's Muhammad Ali, and it's running September 19th through the 22nd. It's a 4-part series on PBS. It is great. We're going to talk about it here today. The most important question I have for you, though, historically, is what do you think we're going to look back in 50 years and think of Mac Jones?
That's great. Well, Mac, I thought did pretty well the other day. He was, you could see why Belichick kept him, right?
Yeah.
And you could see why he picked him in the first place. And he has that Tom Brady, don't go for the big bomb, but do the open guy. And he seemed disciplined, and he just came up on the short end of the stick of a competition with another Alabama quarterback who'd had just a few more miles under his on his engine. So, yeah, I don't think it's going to be Tom Brady. I mean, it would be nice if it was Tom Brady, but I grew up in Ann Arbor, so I happen to think that it has nothing to do with Tuscaloosa. It has everything to do with Ann Arbor.
There we go. Well, we're talking about Brady. I mean, if you had to think of a guy today who's kind of transcends celebrity in sport,
yep,
it's become Tom Brady. I mean, like, especially due to the age in which he plays football, juxtaposed to Michael Jordan, who's kind of shrouded in a little bit relative secrecy and, a little bit more anonymity. And even before them, you didn't hear a lot from athletes. But a guy like Muhammad Ali was like Brady times what?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't even put Brady in the same way. I think we can speak about the word GOAT with relationship to the position of quarterback in the National Football League with regard to him. Mm-hmm. And I think that he's more closely aligned with a Michael Jordan because he has not spent the currency that someone of his position has, just as Michael Jordan hasn't, speaking about issues of social justice, speaking out in a way that they would want to speak out, or just using the platform. I think there's a carefulness. And so in the 1960s, you have Jim Brown, you have Carlos and Smith at the Mexico City Olympics, and they disappear. You have Curt Flood at the end of the 60s, early 70s, who challenges the reserve clause, the plantation system that enslaves not only black but white baseball players, and he's disappeared. And it takes two white guys, Messerschmitt and McNally, with Marvin Miller, to break the reserve clause and cause this huge, big, wonderful explosion and golden age in the sport of baseball. You have Colin Kaepernick, who's not being paid by a football team, even though he could be, but he's got a Nike contract. Right. Muhammad Ali, when he said, I'd rather face machine gun fire than go against my faith, everybody assumed he's giving a middle finger to the U.S. because he doesn't want to fight in Vietnam, when he's got a religious objection. And even the prosecutors say only send him to this much, and the judge sends him to the maximum. And he knows he'd have a cushy job there, right? He'd go to Vietnam, he'd do USO shows, he'd fake, sparring stuff with soldiers, he'd pose for photographs, but it wasn't going to do that. So the level of courage that he had is so great that it influences, I think, modern athletes today. I think are maybe not, thank goodness, have to be in the same position of being challenged. He was dipping into his second wife, Belinda's college fund in order to survive.
Right.
That's what he gave up. And this was the peak of his career, 3.5 years at the height of his powers as a boxer. And then he comes back afterwards. It's just amazing to me.
It is amazing. And it's hard for people to, I think, to imagine, like myself included, because when you look at like who's the most famous athlete today, it's Tom, or it's Michael 10 years ago or 20 years ago or whatever it was. But like boxing was enormous in scale. I mean, I feel like
enormous.
when like kind of shed a little light as you're traveling down this path with Muhammad Ali on just how big it was and how appointment viewing or listening it was for the average American.
From the 1880s through to, I guess, Mike Tyson.
Yeah.
The heavyweight champion really meant something, and really meant something in very symbolic ways. Right. When Jack Johnson, the first African-American to hold it, we invented the term Great White Hope. The idea that an African-American could own this title meant that white people were no longer supreme in their physicality. And so they'd send up fighter after fighter, white hope after white hope, to try to beat Jack Johnson, and couldn't do it. And Muhammad Ali is the same sort of way, but he was dedicated to everybody. You know, this is a story of freedom and courage, but also love. And Jack Johnson was just for Jack Johnson. But you have to understand that who the heavyweight champion was, just about everybody knew, whether they liked boxing or not. I'll tell you something. I've done 6,000 interviews about this Ali thing, it feels like. And when I've been interviewed by sports guys and they start talking about, this, I'll just say to them, who's the heavyweight champion?
Yeah, exactly.
Nobody's answered. It does not matter. Now, I've made 2 films about boxers. I'm not interested in boxing. I love baseball and I love football. Yeah. I made 2 films. One is on Jack Johnson and one is on Muhammad Ali. And it's because they both transcend through principally racial, but also many other dimensions with Muhammad Ali, the actual brutal sport, the sweet science, as it is paradoxically called, that boxing is. And so there's a lot there. Muhammad Ali essentially intersects with every important issue of the last half of the 20th century. Like, what's the role of sports in society? What's the role of a Black athlete? What's the nature of Black manhood or Black masculinity? What's the civil rights movement like? It isn't just a one thing. It's a many thing. And lots of different people have different approaches to what it might be. It's a question of race, of course, the age-old American question. It's about faith and religion and Islam. It's about politics and war. It's about sex. I mean, all of these things. And there are things that we're dealing with now. So we wake up in 2021, and the example of Muhammad Ali is dimensionally greater than any other sports figure. He is the greatest athlete of the 20th century. And I'm willing to sit in a bar and have a beer and say, tell me who's better. I mean, this guy loses 3.5 years of his career, at the height of his career, and comes back and wins the championship twice. And if you put together his fights, they're so unbelievable. First Liston, first Frazier, the Rumble in the Jungle, the Thrill in Manila, lots of other ones I could list. They're like the collective works of William Shakespeare. You couldn't make this stuff up. It's so dramatic. I mean, just the Liston fight, the first Liston fight, where he's expected to be destroyed, and then he's winning on points easily in the first 3 rounds. Then Liston's corner puts liniment on Liston's glove so it gets in Ali's eyes. He's blind against one of the greatest punchers for at least a round and a half. That's 4.5 minutes, if not 2 rounds. And his eyes clears, and then he's back, and it's undisputed victory. And he's the heavyweight champion, and nobody can beat him until, you take away his license because you don't like his point of view. And they saw it as political, as I said, not faith-based.
All the things you rattled off that he represented, is that what Norman Mailer was talking about?
The very spirit of the 20th century. Right. Yeah. And you know what? All of those things don't mean anything. They're just like, if this was high school, then there'd be a quiz on Tuesday. Right. There's no quiz. But what happens is the engagement of all those things produces a story. Right. And out of that story, we have meaning. And the meaning is about freedom. It is very difficult still for a Black man to escape the specific gravity and achieve a kind of freedom that many of us just take for granted. And he did. It's about courage of the kinds I've described, and it's about love. And that's a 4-letter word that the FCC allows me on PBS to use, but it's really tough to talk about. And this guy dies. Let us remember, he dies the most beloved person on the planet. And that doesn't come from being a divisive figure in the 60s because he's bragging, strike 1, he joins the Nation of Islam, strike 2, and he refuses the draft, strike 3. It comes because he spent his life representing other people. When the Supreme Court unanimously, on a technicality, releases him from his jail sentence, he could be jumping up and down, writing a poem, doing all the stuff, bragging. And somebody says, "What do you think of the system?" And he goes, I don't know who will be assassinated tonight. I don't know who's going to be enslaved. I don't know who will be denied justice or equality. And, he's looking back on 350 years of the mistreatment of African Americans on this continent. He's looking ahead to names that, he doesn't know. None of us knew then, but names like Rodney King and Trayvon Martin and Tamir Rice and Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, and I'm sorry to say thousands of others. And he cares about that. Yeah. And that's where that comes from. That's a love where it isn't just about me. Sure. Yeah. I just got an 8-0 victory when Justice recused himself because he'd been in the Justice Department when the thing came down. It's and the one black justice, Thurgood Marshall. Right. You can't make any of this stuff up. That's why it's so much better than Hollywood, Chris, because it's just truth is stranger than fiction. And it's just an amazing story. But he represented so that people around the world felt that he spoke for them. Right. And for all his flaws. And we don't hesitate, as you know, as you've seen, from detailing the flaws, because a hero is not perfect. A hero is about the negotiation between strengths and weaknesses, not about perfection. There's no such thing as perfection. I don't know a perfect person. Do you?
No, not the guy sitting in this chair, at least. And
not the one in this chair.
And so I think, that's a theme I definitely want to get into in a minute, but also the irony, not irony, you said stranger than fiction. It's just like, for a black man to occupy a seat in which he could deliver messages to so many over that 3-year hiatus where he was grappling with so much, and he becomes this person who's wildly influential, and counterculture is bubbling up, and he becomes this kind of person riding the top of the wave for good reason. The way he got there was through the most brutal avenue, and that was the only avenue available to black men.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And you think about how limiting the choices are. I always like to say that COVID did an interesting thing, which was, it was an existential threat to everyone who had a brain. And so the reason why the George Floyd thing mattered in a way that the millions of other murders haven't mattered in quite the same way is because I think white Americans woke up to the fact that, now going to the convenience store is a problem for me. Right. I might get sick and die. But African Americans have been worried about going to the convenience store for as long as there have been convenience stores. Yeah. Because you might get shot and die. Yeah. And for no reason whatsoever. Or to go jogging in a different neighborhood, or to walk down the street, or maybe do something, not so great. But if I do something not so great,
I'm getting away with it. Yeah. I don't
end up dead on the side of the road. I get a ticket. Yep. Right. And so I think that existential threat that COVID represented, and just the division, the larger division in the country, I think just people who hadn't really thought about it said, this isn't fair. Chris Rock was right. He said, I'm a multimillionaire and none of you, speaking to a college audience, several generations after Muhammad Ali was speaking to mostly white college audiences, he goes, I'm a multimillionaire and you wouldn't change places with me for anything. And he's just saying, because I can go to the convenience store, right, and get killed just for going in there and doing something, and that's not even any. I mean, just being normal.
And thousands more subtle discriminations that you wouldn't even realize existed until you wore Chris Rock's clothes and sat in his seat. I mean, so to get where he went, though, Muhammad Ali had to be a self-promoter. He's known to be one of the greatest self-promoters of all time, like an artist in that way almost. But it was very interesting to me to learn that, and made a lot of sense, that he picked up some of his first kind of pointers from wrestling. So tell people who haven't seen the doc or who are getting ready to see the doc where that comes from.
Well, a lot of this, David Remnick, the editor of the New Yorker magazine and also an early biographer of Clay, is talked about this time. He's in Las Vegas for a fight, but he goes and he visits Gorgeous George, who's like this perfumed and hair-permed guy who's primping and whatever. He's the ultimate villain. Everyone loves to hate him. And just light bulb went off, and Ali goes, of course, it doesn't matter. So Ali later on says, boo, throw peanuts, but whatever you do, pay to get in. And so he had P.T. Barnum's essential sense of self-promotion, but he also knew that he was on a bigger mission. Yeah. And that's so great. So he combines all of the histrionic. He doesn't care if people don't like him. He doesn't care. And that's a liberating thing. And he doesn't care if he's not supposed to be this way. He doesn't care if people say, well, a real athlete doesn't respond, doesn't say that. Right. And we've had some goofy people in football, goofy people in baseball, and the system tends to try to snuff the life out of them, or else they're turned into kind of, like the Mark Fidrich, the bird. You remember him? He's talked to the baseball and whatever, Detroit Tiger pitcher, or somebody that had eccentricities, Oil Can Boyd in the 80s for the Red Sox. I mean, you just had people that were eccentric. Football's had that. McMahon, was sort of like
the boss.
Didn't behave the way you were supposed to behave. Dion, but nothing was like this. Yeah. Nothing was at this level of promotion. And he had promoters, and he always did a better job than they did. I mean, there was a newspaper strike in New York City, and he had promised the legislators up in Albany, who were worried about the game and the integrity, that he was going to sell out Madison Square Garden, which hadn't happened for a boxing match in years. And then there's a newspaper strike. So how are people going to find out? He's going door to door. He's knocking on every press guy's thing. He's going to every television station. He's, and they sell out. They sell out this fight. I mean, you just look at him and you go, you cannot help when you see him with this love of life, this ebullience, this joie de vivre, where you can't help but smile and go, I know he was in a lot of people's faces and he made people nervous, but now in retrospect, he can't hurt you. He can only just remind you that you can be a better person if you let go of a lot of the garbage that keeps you down.
Sonny Liston, to me, you mentioned being a heel. Sonny Liston was not only the quintessential heel, but that fight was like the quintessential young Ali fight. Like that's the poster, right? Like that's how most of my generation knows him. But going into that fight, you remarked he wasn't well liked either. So who were people pulling for?
Yeah, well, you know what I think? If we're talking about white America, I'm not sure I could actually speak for Black America at that time, because I think that Muhammad Cassius Clay was a difficult package to accept, because he was, athletes weren't supposed to behave this way, and not a Black athlete. You're going to get us into trouble, right? Yeah. So in a paradoxical way, the thuggishness of Sonny Liston, right? Out of prison, tied to the mob, this gigantic guy that is, just a slugger. Clay was not going to last around.
He was out of a movie. He was out of a movie.
And so right, he's central casting. And so in a way, I remember with my dad, and I was 64. So I'm like, the fight's in February. So I'm like 10 and a half years old. And it's not that I'm for Sonny Liston. It's just he's the familiar person, right? But this other guy is unfamiliar and just a little bit scary. And so I think that that's the evolution that I know I made individually with my dad. And Howard Cosell was a great helper in that, because in the beginning, Howard Cosell is antagonistic towards Clay. And then when he changes his name, he calls him Clay for a while. But then all of a sudden he realized, oh my God, this guy's sincere. This guy is also very, very good. And we can help each other. And Ali was no fool. He understood exactly how he could ride Cosell for as long as he could ride him. And that would be just as he did anything else. One of the great stories is there's a life photographer named Flip Schulte, who comes down to Miami on assignment, Life magazine, to take pictures of Ali training, right? Mm-hmm. So they take some pictures, and Ali says, do you want to see me training underwater? And he goes, sure. No one trains underwater. No boxer had ever trained underwater. But here is Ali's genius. Yeah. He says, want to watch me? And of course, this photographer gets the underwater equipment. He gets the beautiful spread in Life magazine. It's gorgeous. It never happened. And he doesn't get back until finally he realized he's been had by the greatest promoter since P.T. Barnum. It's just, that's to me like there are lots of perfect Ali stories in all the different facets. That's one. Then this is one of the most generous people on earth. Period. Right. And so there's a story that's told that by his biographer, Jonathan Eigen, in the film, that Angelo Dundee comes over to him in the Fifth Street gym, the walk-up seedy place where he's training. And he says, see that guy in the wheelchair over there? He's going to try to tell you he's Roy Campanella, the great Dodger star who was in a car accident, the MVP who was catcher for the championship Dodgers in the 50s. And he's going to tell you he's Roy Campanella, confined to a wheelchair. And don't give him anything. He's a hustler. A few minutes later, he looks over and Ali's ripping off a roll of bills and giving it to this guy, right? And Dundee goes on, he says, wait, I told you he's a hustler. And he goes, Ange, we have legs. Like that is the perfect Ali story too. It's like, yeah, sure. I made a film about the Shakers. This is going to sound like out of left field. And it really is. The Shakers are a celibate religious sect.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
And they discovered that their poorer neighbors were stealing their crops at night.
Yeah.
So what did the Shakers do? Plant more crops. They said, we plant some for the thieves and some for the crows and some for the Shakers. Thieves and crows have to eat too. And Muhammad Ali, that is the quintessential Christian gesture, is it not?
Yeah.
Oh, you're stealing? Let us plant more so that you will have some stuff to take. Here is a guy who's embracing this cuckoo, dangerous sect that but gives him a kind of foundation of meaning in a turbulent world that's not treating him and his people very well. And his idea of generosity is way beyond his gravestone, Cave Hill Cemetery in Louisville, Kentucky.
Yeah.
It says, service to others is the price you pay for your room in heaven. And Muhammad Ali has the biggest suite there is.
That's a pretty good way to wrap up his life's work. I'd love for people to say that. That's just beautiful.
Don't you want that about you? Don't you want to die the most beloved person on your planet?
By my family. I don't want to chase the rest of it. But if I were Muhammad Ali and I had that reach, you have no choice. You could either waste it and just be a great boxer, which on its head is awesome. Or you could do a million other things in the arenas of service and in the arenas of change making. So
Michael J. Fox, the actor, right, has Parkinson's as well. The same affliction, if that's what you want to call it. They've transformed it. I remember something that Michael J. Fox said years and years ago that really struck me, and it was so beautiful. He said, "I couldn't be still until I couldn't be still."
Right.
Meaning he learned about himself through the affliction. And so here you have in Ali, the most voluble, talking all the time guy, and funny and jokes and serious and wise and whatever. And yet, in a way, he couldn't really talk until he couldn't talk. And then all of a sudden, the entire world, like if he called a press conference in the 60s, the sports world would stop, more or less, most of the sports world. He visit Pakistan, the entire country would stop. There are thousands of people named Muhammad Ali Clay because so many people named Muhammad Ali. He was a superstar around the world, not for the boxing prowess, although that was something, but because he spoke to people who felt like nobody had heard their story.
Yeah.
And that's what and his daughter at the end of the film, Rashida, pinches her fingers together and says, boxing was only this much. And that means he could have been a simple carpenter. And we know in world religions where simple carpenters have gone.
Yes, we do.
And so you have this prophet of love that I'm unabashed. There's a great shot in that Fifth Street gym, the same place where the hustler conned him out of some money, which he gave away freely. It's only a con if you feel like it's a con. Right. Right. And he's training for the Liston fight. It's 64. It's the British invasion. And who should show up at the Fifth Street gym but John, Paul, George, and Ringo? And there's a great, this setup shot. I'm sure you've seen it.
Yeah.
Where he seems to be punching and they're all going over like dominoes. But it occurred to me, these are five men who understood the heart of the matter for all of humanity, and certainly for the last 60 years that we've been struggling as a country and as a world with these things. Three of those men are dead. Two of them are still alive. One of them wrote probably the summary of all of that, which is, and in the end, the love you take is equal to the love you make. And all five of them spent their entire professional lives, as long as they lived, one murdered, one died, two died of debilitating diseases, cancer with Harrison and Parkinson's with Ali. But they all spent their lives, even in this brutal sport of boxing, promoting this incongruous thing that we have a hard time talking about called love.
And by the way, the George Harrison documentary is pretty good.
Pretty great, huh?
Scorsese one. He's my favorite Beatle. I have to say that all the time.
Well, it's interesting because it's always, Lennon and McCartney's output is beyond compare.
Yeah.
And if you're talking about who the greatest band is in rock and roll, you have to, if you're honest, go besides the Beatles. And then you look at a list of the Beatles songs, and the top 6 songs, at least 3 of them are George Harrison songs.
Exactly.
My Guitar Gently Weep, Here Comes the Sun, and Something, right? Yeah. And then you're talking about this guy who's like, he's like the tortoise in the hare. So you're arguing, well, Paul wrote this, but John wrote that, and Paul did this, and they've all got great tunes.
Well, it's all subjective anyways.
It's all subjective.
There's nothing subjective about the fighting, though. So
no.
And that's interesting that people from all vocations, all walks of life, seem to gravitate to Muhammad Ali. I mean, I've seen pictures of Waylon Jennings with Muhammad Ali, like they were buddies. Like, people that you just wouldn't expect found some sort of, I don't know, like, hey, I'm interested in this guy. Maybe the first time I heard him speak, it scared me, or it stirred something up in me that made me uncomfortable. But by the time I met him, I mean, like, he probably won a lot of people over that didn't expect that he, on his speaking tour as well. I'm looking at a lot of these kids. I'm like, there's no way these white kids at Chapel Hill or wherever else he was talking, or Chicago, some of the App State was mentioned. Like, there's no way these kids ever heard this messaging before. From somebody who had the balls to say it that looked like him.
Exactly. Well, you know what? I made a film a few years ago with the same, this film is co-directed by my oldest daughter, Sarah, and her husband, David McMahon, Sarah Burns. Yeah. And Sarah and Dave wrote the script. And so it's equally theirs. And so it's embarrassing for me to, take it, it's like a lot of people on the team, that thing. But this is an amazing story. We made a film earlier about the guy in the previous generation, Jackie Robinson, who redefined Black manhood. And it occurred to me that if in 1947, when Jackie comes up, you're a Brooklyn Dodger fan, but you're a racist, what are you going to do? Right? Yeah. And it seems to me you got 3 choices. One is you're going to say, oh, I'm going to change my team. But, if Jackie's coming to the Dodgers, African-Americans are going to be coming to every team. Right. Or you could change your sport. But that's the same thing too. And in fact, some of the other sports had already, had African-American players, but they weren't just as big and as popular as baseball was, as monolithically great. Or number 3, you can change. And that's what these people like Jackie Robinson and Muhammad Ali do. They sponsor in you, however conscious or unconscious, the realization or even just the subconscious movement towards something that's better. Yep. Lincoln called it the better angels of our nature. That's what it's about. And that's why if you're going to say, who are you going to have at that dinner party? You can invite 2 people. I'd say Muhammad Ali and Louis Armstrong, who basically is the guy who took jazz from this ensemble music to this soloist art. You just can't have. You add Abraham Lincoln, you add, Harriet Tubman or Ida B. Wells or, whoever it is. It's a big dinner table if you can do it. But man, when you're talking about somebody that when you leave their presence, you feel transformed, Muhammad Ali is one of them.
Muhammad Ali might talk over the music is the only consideration. He'd be music.
Anybody who can say, I'm so bad, I can drown a drink of water and kill a dead tree.
Yeah, he's part of the music. I mean, that people, I mean, he was one of the first rhymers. I mean, just
he's a proto rapper.
Yeah. Right? I mean, he's an amazing in so many ways, influential in so many ways. But one of the interesting ways that he influenced people was he forced them to consider that other people might have a different faith than them in the arena of American pro sports, which was very, even for Black Americans, the fight where he wasn't saying
Ernie
his
Terrell
name,
was calling him Clay. Yeah.
Floyd as well. Like the NOI was kept a secret. The Nation of Islam was kept a secret. His involvement with Malcolm X and I guess his burgeoning passion for that faith until he won the fight with Sonny Liston. And I never realized this part of it. They were trying to keep it under wraps because you probably aren't going to get that title bout you're not
Well,
going to get that fight.
a week or two before the Liston fight, the promoter said, I'm not selling tickets because Malcolm X is involved. And so they send Malcolm back to New York to just sort of cool things. And then he flies back on the eve of the fight. And they're certain that, Clay is going to, run away and do something. But that night after he wins, nobody on his camp had planned a party. So he and Malcolm X go back to the all black Hampton house and have vanilla ice cream at the little shop. And then he and Jim Brown and Sam Cooke stay up all night talking about his future. And the next day he comes out not bragging, but saying, I don't have to be what you want to be. I can be who I want to be. As Robert Lipsyte, the sports writer, said, an athletic declaration of independence. And then immediately I'm joining the Nation of Islam. I've been a member of the Nation of Islam. And so, he's liberated. He's achieved a kind of freedom. He's escaped the specific gravity of the African-American community. And so it's worrisome to the African-American community, which has invested in the Christian religion they were forced to adopt when they were kidnapped and brought here, and have done a hell of a good job representing Christian values, I have to say. Turning the other cheek, affirmation in the face of adversity, all of the stuff that goes on. But he was worrisome because, and let's face it, there's nothing pure about the Nation of Islam. It's not Islam, it's a cult, and they've got some dangerous stuff. Remember, they do assassinate one of their own after they've expelled him, Malcolm X. There's corruption. There's impregnation of secretaries and female assistants. So this is not, the model thing. But what Malcolm X first and Muhammad Ali, just in his own inner self, is moving towards is a much more expansive and generous version of Islam that is more in tune with mainstream, as Kareem Abdul-Jabbar says in our film, who is a Muslim but has joined a Muslim group, not a kind of sect thing. It moves towards that. That's more ecumenical, more generous, and this is where Muhammad Ali. This is where it's the evolution. You can't just say, "Oh, he did this," and it's a fact. Everybody's fluid. It's like saying you joined the Patriots, and then this happened. That's all you are. No, all these things happened while I did this, and then I did this. So everything is in flux, everything's in motion. And that's what I felt. There are lots of really good documentaries about Muhammad Ali, but none had actually done soup to nuts, and we wanted to be able to follow this as a spiritual journey, not just say, oh, he had joined this thing and it had these repercussions, but understand how he changed and evolved and grew.
How much do you think like a young Muhammad Ali or a young Cassius Clay before he became Muhammad Ali, how much of it is like truly his conviction, and how much of it is like, I'm a young, person who can easily be influenced, just like myself at 22 or, yourself at 22, like all of a sudden you're on top of the world and you have Malcolm X in your ear and you have Elijah Muhammad in your ear, and it's just a lot for a kid, no matter what.
That's a super smart question, Chris. Super smart. So I don't know the answer because we can't know unless he were here and able to express it. But he grows up in, segregated Louisville, Kentucky. His father's bitter because he's a painter, but nobody treats him like an artist, so he has to be a sign painter. It's both nurturing and protective in a middle-class Black neighborhood, but it's also got all the constraints of Jim Crow. And he's seen Emmett Till's open casket, pictures of this brutalized, murdered, tortured Black kid who's not that much older than him. It's hugely influential. And so he's struggling. He doesn't know what it is. He is, as we all are, we go to college and we meet a professor, and that professor wakes us up, or a coach, and that person gives us life values that we keep for the rest of our lives, or at least build on for the rest of our lives. And I think bumping into the Nation of Islam, it made a lot of sense in that do for self. You can't expect others to do it. It's just going to be for yourself. We're on our own. You've been given a slave name. What's that? Who are you? Right. Told this. So in a fundamental way, it made a lot of sense. It of course had some really rough edges and untied stuff, but that's
sounds like organized religion to me.
Sounds like all of organized religion.
But also, if I was black in the 60s, I would want to be segregated from white people. And I don't think that's that ridiculous of a request. I would be you guys can be over here. I'm going to be over here.
So here we are. We hold up quite rightfully Martin Luther King as the ideal of the Southern integrationist civil rights movement, turn the other cheek, nonviolent. But, there's an interview with Bud Collins where he says, I admire Governor Wallace, George Wallace, the segregationist governor of Alabama. And Bud Collins is like, don't you want to take that back? Kind of. He doesn't say that, but it's like, he goes, yeah, he says that you shouldn't move into a neighborhood if they don't want you. Now, there are lots of answers to that question. Right. But at the same time, there's a kind of internal fundamental logic for a kid, like a early 20-something like Ali says, well, I don't want to go where I'm not wanted. It's so funny because he's a person who crossed all barriers. He hires a white trainer. He's got white people and brown people and as well as black people surrounding him. And yet he's representing in a larger sense, black people. And so that makes the story incredibly accessible for all of us. And in a way, it helps us grow. That's what I'm trying to say. I just think we always want them to do the changing, right? It's always, Mark Twain said, nothing so needs reforming as other people's habits, right? I mean, it's so easy to say, Chris, could you please not do this and please not do this because it really bothers me. In point of fact, the only person I am able to work on is myself. And so I think Muhammad Ali provides us with enough irritation, enough inspiration, enough just stuff that you can spend your time, you can waste your life hating him or being mad at him or whatever. But really, all he's done is given you an opportunity to work on yourself.
I put you on the spot with that hypothetical question. I'll give you another hypothetical question as a segue into the draft talk, because as we said earlier, listen, there's been a lot of great athlete activists since him, but the amount of risk that he posed himself, it's just scary stuff, especially when he's not trying to get out of getting shot. He's trying to get out of going on a fucking USO tour. Excuse my French here, Ken. I just cussed at Ken Burns. I got a great job.
My grandmother would used to say, boys, don't swear. Not that I give a damn, but it sounds like hell to other people.
Oh, that's so funny. I always use that. But would Cassius Clay or Muhammad Ali have fought in World War II? Would it make any difference to him?
Another super great question. His mentor, Elijah Muhammad, went to jail at World War II, which everybody went. He did not go because his religion forbade it. And at that point, is a black man saying no? And they said, no, this isn't religious. This isn't based on anything. You're just lazy and you don't want to go, so you're going to jail. So he goes to jail. I think he's being inspired by the courage of his mentor, but he's exhibiting a new kind of courage in a different kind of riskier age for us. So that's why that's why we're talking about him.
Right.
It's because we're 55, 60 years from the moment of these things, and he's still inspirational. He still can be rousing in the best sort of the word to make us be our better selves.
Well, it was illuminating to me a little bit hearing him actually talk about it. I hadn't seen enough footage of him talking about the draft, but it didn't seem like it was an issue as much of like, hey, is the Vietnam War just? But it was like, hey, it's a non-starter for me.
Yes, right.
So,
no,
that might answer the World War II question. I was just like, for a long time, I thought, well, he knew before we knew that the war was totally out of line. But it wasn't just that.
This is why he comes back. Yeah. You hit the nail on the head. This is why we forgave him. This is why, for his supposed sins, the sins were ours.
Yeah.
The reason, he comes back because people are suddenly realizing, oh my God, he was right about Vietnam. Oh my God, he was courageous. He that we did the thing on Vietnam, and we had people saying, the courageous thing to do would have been to not go, to go.
Yeah.
And the guy went, and, this is Tim O'Brien, who wrote one of the greatest books ever about war and about the Vietnam War, called The Things They Carried. And he's still carrying the burden of the fact that he went, rather than because he didn't want to disappoint his parents and his community and his girlfriend and whatever. And he knew it was wrong even then. And he's still beating himself up. And Muhammad Ali just said, no, this is not what I believe. That would be, he says, that would be 100% against the teachings of Elijah Muhammad and the Muslim religion and the Quran, the holy book of my religion. And you just got to go, this guy's like 22, 23 years old.
Stones.
Yeah.
I mean, my man had stones. He comes back after that whole hiatus, the speaking tour, which was a really interesting part of the doc. He comes back, he's not the same fighter. And I think, again, we have this idea in our generation that he was perpetually the guy standing over Sonny Liston.
Yeah.
You know, like when he comes back, he's a different fighter. The fight we all remember, the fights we all remember, most easily is the trilogy between him and Joe Frazier.
Yeah, I mean, this is it. And the first one he loses, and he definitely loses that fight, and it begins to show some of the weaknesses and also some of the strengths. He's going to learn how to take a punch, as Ferdy Pacheco, his fight doctor, said, and that's going to be a good thing and a very bad thing because he's going to do it.
One of the interesting things after the Frazier trilogy is the Foreman, Don King, Zaire, like kind of zany. It's like the fifth episode to me, or the fifth season of The Wire or something. It's like,
no.
It's just gone a little bit off the rails here. The thing I'm wondering about is, like, do you think Don King is good or bad for boxing? Like, as you look at it later down the line, could we use more of Don King now? And is that why boxing is struggling? Or do you think Don was a negative character?
Well, I don't know that. He just is a force. I mean, is a tornado a negative character? Yes, if it causes damage. So yeah, Don King was willing to do a fight well after Ali shouldn't have been fighting at all. Mm-hmm. You know, this is a guy who also beat somebody else up into jail and should have spent a hell of a lot more time in jail than he did. This is, you know, a guy, there's an immorality or an amorality to Don King. And, it's all about money. And so, he's a very interesting character. So you can't dismiss him out of hand. It's just very, very interesting. No, I'm not sure that boxing will ever recover from the absence of Muhammad Ali, and does it need to, I mean, do we care? I mean, about people beating themselves up once you don't have somebody of this dynamic stuff? Yeah, we tolerated Tyson for a while because he was so out there and he bit somebody's ear. And, it's just, but at the end of the day, is that what your celebrity is about? Yeah. I mean, when you have somebody who's preceded you, who is, the broken record, who dies the most beloved person on the planet, Yeah.
I mean, that service to me was a barometer. Like, if you can have a service like that, and like Kings have had smaller.
Yeah.
Like,
no. We were talking about this the other night. Like, who is the most popular person? We go, well, maybe you go to the Pope because there are, 2 or 3 billion Catholics or however many Catholics there are. And there are a lot of other people who admire him as a holy leader. But, who else is out there that has that kind of universal positive stuff? And maybe you go, well, Michelle Obama, yes, but we're not talking about the same league as Muhammad Ali.
Nope.
And so where is he? Well, at least in a kind of flickering shadow of it, he's in 4 episodes that we've spent the last 7 years working on that will be on PBS on the 19th.
Last question to close it out. Towards the beginning of the doc, you pick the torch to kind of set the table a little bit for what we're going to see after it. And I wonder, because he did go through so many phases and stages, including the demise, which is an interesting part of the doc and had to be painful to watch some of that footage.
Really painful.
Who or when was Muhammad Ali most Muhammad Ali to you?
What a great question. I don't know, Chris. That's great. Because he's him as a little kid. You can see it when he's barely picked up boxing gloves and he says he's going to be the greatest. He knows already. Yeah. And he's at the Olympics where even the Russians fall in love with him. And he's overcoming Sonny Liston despite the liniment in his eyes. Or he's dispatching Ernie Terrell or Big Cat Williams in these masterpieces of fight. Or he's losing to Joe Frazier. Or he's standing up to the U.S. government. Or he's beating Foreman. I mean, what could be anything amazing? People in his corner, nobody thought he was going to win. Everyone thought, please don't kill him. And he beats Foreman. And then the third Frazier fight is like Armageddon. And then there's this whole after, the excruciating, please, daddy, stop fighting, his daughters are saying to him. And he won't. And he keeps losing horrifically. And then the Parkinson's, and he's encased, but yet he's, as David Remnick said, he's like a Buddha. He's like a religious figure that everybody admires, forgetting all the other stuff. So I mean, my fudge, my dodge, my horrific, avoidance of your question is he's like all of those things, he's every single one of those things. And I think maybe he's so beautiful, right? When he says, I'm pretty as a girl, he's absolutely right. He's got the most beautiful body. If Michelangelo were alive today and was going to sculpt David, I'd go, David, Ali, I'm going to do Ali, right? This is a gorgeous specimen of that. And there's this joy when he's with the twinkle in his eye, when he's just reciting the poetry or provoking somebody where you go, okay, maybe that's it. And I guess I suppose if you really nailed it down, I'd want to remember that just perfect athlete who's disposing of Cleveland Big Cat Williams and what Michael Bent, our secret weapon, the former heavyweight champion, who's embedded in every one of the important fights. And he just said, that's Baryshnikov, that's Picasso, that's Miles Davis. This is a masterpiece. And he's doing these 10-punch combinations and he's going backwards. And then Bent just looks at you going, like, he must have come out of the womb doing this, he says. And so maybe you just take this minor fight. The ref called it in the third round, and, it was no contest from the very first second. So it doesn't have the dynamics or the drama of the fights. But man, just him at his most exquisite best is there. But then you'd say, when he's talking about the draft and willing to face a machine gun, who's that?
But I think you're right, Ken, because it is that first thing you mentioned that made him a conduit for all these lessons that people had to learn.
Yes.
That's what set him apart from all the incredibly brave, bold people that have littered U.S. history. That was what got him to have his voice. So I'm with you. It's the boxer. That was the passport. Thank you so much, Ken Burns.
Chris, brother, you are so great. I'd do this every week with you if I had something to say.
Don't say it. I'll fucking call you. I'll call you. Be well, dude.
Take it easy. Thanks so much.
Okay.